good morning, everyone. Welcome to today's Diversity and Inclusion webinar, Forging a Path Forward to Become a Diverse, Equitable, and Inclusive Organization. My name is Amy Allen, and I'm the Senior Program Manager for the National Apartment Association's Education Institute. Before we get started, I just want to go over a few housekeeping tips. This presentation is being recorded, and we will post it on the NAA website within a couple days. There is a diversity and inclusion resources page on the website, and that's where this recording will be. So we encourage you to go back and listen, share it with friends, really promote it if you'd like. During this discussion, this will be a panel discussion. There is a Q&A box on your screen, and we invite you to type any questions that you have in that box. We will monitor those questions, and if it's appropriate, bring them up during the presentation, but we'll also have time at the end for Q&A. So it's possible that your questions will be read aloud at that time. Let me move on here. Today's webinar is brought to you by Home Depot Pro. We like to thank them for their support of NAA's and the industry's endeavors. And thank you for that. Now I want to turn things over to Greg Cerbana. Greg is the Vice President at Widener Apartment Homes in Kirkland, Washington. Greg is a member of NAA's Diversity and Inclusion Committee. He's currently the Vice President and incoming President of NAA's Education Institute. And today, Craig will be introducing our panel. Craig? Craig?
Thanks very much, Amy. Hello, folks. Looking forward to today's webinar. We've got a power-packed group of panelists here for you today. So I promise that I'm not going to speak very long because, as many of you know, I could take up this whole hour myself. So I'm going to go through these intros very quickly and then turn it over to this group. But I just got to say how proud I am to see where our diversity and inclusion efforts at the National Apartment Association have been from back in the times where we had a task force put together several years ago with Josie, I see you on the call, and a number of other folks to where we're at today. Proud of where we're at and look forward to where we're going. So first off, Stephanie Anderson, she's the Manager of Industry Operations, as you can see, for NAA. She has almost 15 years of property management experience, and she started on site, like me, as a part-time leasing consultant. She's very highly accomplished, having been named as NAAEI's CAM of the Year in 2013, and then she followed that up in 2015 by being named the Designate of the Year for the Institute. That's impressive for sure. But when I asked her what her greatest life accomplishments were, she said that she had 3 of them, and they all call her mom. So Tyler, Tinsley, and Taylor are probably around there someplace, but they're very proud of her, and we're looking forward to Stephanie's impact on our conversation today. We also have Mr. Marcus Cole, who is the Director of the Future Housing Leaders Program at Fannie Mae, and I'm excited to hear Mr. Cole's contributions today, as his role at Fannie is all about connecting underserved communities of color into this wonderful and multifaceted housing industry that we're all a part of. So the Future Leaders Program attempts to identify collegiate candidates and connect them to internships and jobs in sectors such as housing finance, real estate development, fintech, and building and construction. And a quick peek into his Facebook profile indicates he's a native of Buffalo, New York. He's a new daddy and a fan of Linkin Park. He loved the Thundercats, which is the movie, and has an affinity for the long-running animated sitcom South Park. Chikora Connor is the president of Occupancy Heroes Incorporated, and she established her firm in 2003 and serves as its president and founder. But her exposure to this industry goes way back before 2003. In fact, you could say she was born into the real estate industry and in the world, as her extended family, including grandparents, parents, siblings, her children, and her nephew, have all been or are currently still active in the industry. She's been in the property management and leasing world for well over 15 years, and she observed several unmet needs in the industry, which is how she developed Occupancy Heroes into a total leasing solution that fosters equity, diversity, and inclusion. And if you've been paying attention during this pandemic, you'll have seen her featured on a number of panels and webinars where these sorts of topics have been discussed. One of her proudest moments is creating the Maintenance Heroes division of her firm, which allowed her to participate in the training, certification, and apprenticeships of newcomers to the industry, and then helping them start their own businesses. We also have Mr. Peter Lynch, who's the head of people and culture at Cardinal Group Companies. He's a relative new hire there, but worked with the firm in the past as a consultant. And this guy's bio reads like an unbelievable journey. I just got a chance to meet him, but a noted Fortune 500 global executive, a successful podcaster, an impactful storyteller. He's the featured VIP event speaker at the largest TEDx in the world, which is TEDx Mile High in Denver, where he lives. He's an in-demand speaker on topics such as talent and operations, culture, and HR, a high-performance executive coach with a roster of very interesting clients, and the founder of Hitch Studio, which focused on training, culture, and the modern talent lifecycle. And in his spare time, Peter creates TikTok videos for fun. Although his kids hate that he tends to arrive at new social media before them, he makes a conscious effort not to try and embarrass them by dancing. But he does post the occasional funny video that includes his pets. In fact, that helped one of his first TikTok videos get to over 250,000 views, and I want to be like Peter. And last but certainly not least, we have Kristen Magnai. She's the president at Higher Up Consulting, a proud graduate of Penn State. Kristen began her career in hospitality management and then transitioned to staffing and executive search until moving into corporate human resources in 2006. All told, she has over 20 years of experience leading innovation and change management in the human capital and organizational development space, the last 16 of which have been specific to the commercial real estate industry. Professionally speaking, she's incredibly proud of the work she did at Bozzuto, helping to build and then lead the work of diversity, equity, and inclusion, thereby transforming the organization during a time of leadership, transition, and growth. In an article from her time with Bozzuto, she was quoted as saying, quote, "We're very dependent on making sure that we hire the right people, that they embrace our mission, that they find joy and happiness in serving others." And those words stuck out to me. If you're advocating for your team members to have joy and happiness in their pursuit of serving their customers, that's the kind of company I want to work for. In her spare time, you can find Kristen at the beach or vacationing in places where she can explore new cultural experiences, so long as the weather is warm. So this is, as I said before, a fantastic panel with so much to share with you. I know you're going to enjoy today's webinar. Thank you for letting me be a little part of it. And I'm going to turn it over to Stephanie.
Greg, thank you so much for those great introductions. I know all of our panelists, and I did just learn a thing or two. Meanwhile, I will be checking out Peter's TikTok videos because why not? I really want to thank you all for joining us today. I know that in a world right now where operations are constantly evolving and there's so much change that's happening around us, it's so important for us to meet and talk about topics like diversity and inclusion. And so I'm excited for you to take the time today to join us. We have a great lineup of panelists today that are going to share so much thought-provoking information. So take notes. And know that you, of course, can rewatch this video, as Amy said, in the days to come. So without further ado, I would love to start off today's webinar by taking a poll. So Amy, if you would go up and put up our first poll question, we want to really be able to see who is here with us today. So can you just take a quick moment and click on one of the buttons there to let us know what is your role within your organization? I'm going to give you just a few more seconds to do that, and then we're going to show our results. This is really going to help with our panelists today to be able to share information that's very relevant to your positions. Ooh, good call, Sloan. Affiliates are not up there. That's okay. We know that you're here, though. All right, let's go ahead and show the results there, Amy, if you don't mind. Okay, so our largest are going to be our corporate employees here, 49%. I just want to mention, though, that regardless of what position you're in, you do have an opportunity to make change within your organization. And so don't let it affect you, whether you're at the top of the leadership or if you're an on-site leader. It's really important that you understand that you have an opportunity here. So let's go ahead and look at our next poll question. Does your company have a diversity and inclusion program? Let's take just a few moments and click on one of those boxes. Okay, Amy, can you go ahead and share those results for us, please? Okay, that's great news already. 48% does in fact have a program in place. But that also gives us a lot of opportunity here, because we're going to talk about how you can improve those programs in place. And then, of course, if you don't have any program at all, we're going to talk about how you get started. And then for our last and final poll question, before we dive into our panelist, I'd like to know, does your company practice inclusion as it relates to your involvement in the recruitment process? Now, this is a pretty deep question here, but it's going to help us. We want to gauge what our attendees are and what their thoughts are in the recruitment process. We'll give you just another couple seconds to answer that. Okay, Amy, let's see what the final verdict is. Okay, not too bad. Of course, you know, seeing the never is a little concerning, even if it was just 0.01%. But this is good. This is great. We appreciate all of your honesty here. So I think where we should really get started in today's conversation is starting with each of our panelists. We want them to share with us their personal experience. We're going to have each speaker elaborate on their commitment to this important topic today. And let's see, who should we start with? I think we should start with Marcus. No pressure.
No pressure at all. Good morning, everyone. Thank you so much. It's great to be here. As Greg mentioned, my name is Marcus Cole. I'm the Director of Future Housing Leaders at Fannie Mae. And I am extremely passionate about diversity and inclusion for a number of reasons. I grew up in inner city Buffalo, New York. I'm a huge Bills fan, by the way, which Greg failed to mention. And growing up in the inner city, one thing I realized is that there's not a lot of opportunities for just awareness of what's going on in housing, whether that be from housing finance or even some of the work that our panelists are doing as far as property management and things of that nature. So I was fortunate enough to really pursue urban planning and then get into housing. And one thing I realized is soon after I started working, there weren't a lot of people that looked like me. So I'm really passionate about this topic because I think that one, you know, equality and equity is certainly important. If I look back at my personal background and looking at the flight and path of my parents, both grew up on the south side of Chicago and were involved in civil rights. So that is something that is instilled in me. And I think as time has progressed, and clearly we're dealing with a lot of social unrest, that this issue, although has always been important, I think we've been thrust into the forefront of making sure that everyone realizes that they have a responsibility to make sure that we're living and breathing what equality is and inclusion and diversity. So hopefully that answered the question, but super passionate about this. And one thing that I'll end with is I've been at Fannie Mae for 10 years. I've been fortunate enough to be the Director of Future Housing Leaders for 2 years. And prior to this role, I didn't consider myself a true D&I practitioner, but really understanding the impact that I have not only in Fannie Mae, but across the industry has truly opened my eyes to the responsibility of all of us and your ability to lead from wherever you are. So I hope that answers your question and looking forward to engaging with you all today.
That's a great perspective, Marcus. Thank you for sharing that. Kristen, I would love for you to share your personal experience with us.
Sure. Thank you so much for having me here today. I think I'm going to share a personal story, actually. I like to refer to it as my truth. So a little bit about my background and how I grew up. I was raised with a younger sibling that was born with a rare disease that made her severely developmentally disabled, and she also had epilepsy. Back in the 70s, there was not a lot of science to support the disease that she had, and most parents of children like her chose to institutionalize their children rather than raising them on their own. My parents, who were both teachers, my father actually was a speech pathologist, which is interesting because he had a nonverbal child, chose to raise her until she passed away at the age of 32. So my parents advocated her entire life for basic human rights, which at that time were not considered to be necessary for children like her: physical therapy, occupational therapy, so that she could enjoy the best possible life that she could have. And so I was raised in an environment in which advocacy was very prevalent. That being said, I also have a deep understanding for what it feels like to not belong. We were not the normal family. And so I struggle with the word normal and what that actually means, because from my perspective, as much as I wanted to be normal then and my family to be considered normal, because people chose not to associate with us because of my sister. But now I look back on it and I said, what is more normal than two working parents doing the best they can for their children and loving unconditionally? That's 1,000% normal for me. So fast forward to grown-up life. I've been blessed to raise a young man of color. I did it as a single mom. And I've had the opportunity to make decisions that not only impact me, but impact the experiences that he has. So being in environments that are very diverse, where he has an equitable opportunity to succeed just like everybody else, has always been part of how I've raised him. And I've also enjoyed and been really, really impacted by his view of the world. And as he just started college on Monday, actually, he's a freshman. But it was super important to him, despite getting some substantial financial scholarships as a diversity candidate to go to a variety of colleges, he wanted to be someplace where he could see other people who look like him. And so I have a deep appreciation of how important that is for people to feel included, to see people who look like them, to see success in a way where it reflects who they are. And so that's my passion. That's my passion around this work. Those are two of many stories I could tell, but this has been my life's work. And I've been a formal D&I practitioner since 2013. But I really do believe that this is my calling. And I stand on the shoulders of people like my parents who paved the way for folks with disabilities and the rights that they have today.
What a great share, Kristen. Thank you. That was a very personal experience, and I think a lot of people could really relate to that. So thank you for sharing. I do want to mention that Kathy in our chat box wanted to share a quote of a friend. Normal is a cycle on the washer. Interesting perspective. Makes sense. Yeah. Thanks for sharing that, Kathy. Well, Shakora, I would love for you to share some thoughts on your personal experience with us today.
Well, thank you for having me this morning. I have been fighting for diversity and inclusion since the beginning of my career. I started as a property manager. I was barely 21, and I was assigned to oversee 176 units. The interview process was intense. It was a 3-part interview, and I was finally hired. The woman who hired me was Caucasian, and she made it a point to let me know that her husband was Hispanic and that she would be an ally for me because she understood my struggle. Fast forward, I worked on property with her for about 3 weeks. I trained under her, and then I was moved over to my own property. When I went to that property, of course, everything was in disarray, because it always is when you take on a new property. And we were short-staffed, so I immediately started hiring staff members, and we were doing an amazing job. Everything was great. The owner was excited. The management team, they were thrilled. And the management, they were bringing on new properties. So they decided that they needed to bring on a regional manager. When they hired this regional manager, she was super sweet in front of everyone. But then her first official day came, and she was on property. She walked in, and there was this gentleman that I had hired. He walked in ready to start his day, and she ran out and she said, "Oh no, I'm sorry, you were hiring in error. We are not hiring." As he turned to walk away, she turned to me and she said, "Place an ad for new employees." Well, I did that, and she brought on her own maintenance supervisor. And they both drove around the property with Confederate flags. Keep in mind, this was a community. It was a community. There were, various backgrounds, and that just wasn't received well. But they just boasted it. Didn't matter. They threw out racial slurs. They were very racist to me, to my staff, and to the residents. During this time, I found out that they were stealing appliances, and I approached this regional. And of course, I was terminated. So I went to the woman who said that she would be an ally for me. And I told her what happened. She picked up the phone, she called the regional and told her I was there. Shortly thereafter, after I left the property, I got a phone call from that regional, and she said, listen, if you call the owners, I'm going to terminate everybody on this property, and I'm going to have you arrested for slander. Well, I did just that. And she followed through on her promise. She terminated everyone, and I was arrested the next day for assault. Well, thankfully, it was thrown out. And but that made me to think, you know what, I've got to do something. I have got to fight, not just for myself, but I also have to fight for the employees that were on that property. So I called the NAACP. I went to the EOC. I filed a complaint. I finally got the employees to come on board because it was a hard sale to them. They thought there's no way that there's going to be any kind of justice. Well, in fact, we did get justice. We had a solid case, so much so we all received monetary compensation. The regional was terminated, and the maintenance supervisor was terminated. So you see, I'm here today because I am a testimonial. I am a testimonial to what can happen if you fight for what's right. And I will continue to fight for equality until we're not feeling less than anymore for the color of our skin, until we're not feeling less than for a creed, for, just our age and, our sex and how we identify as human beings. I'll continue to be on this fight. So that's why I am here today. I'm a vessel, and I'm here to bring about change.
Wow. Thank you for sharing, Jacora. I could feel that in the pit of my stomach. And the sad news is that still happens each and every day. And so I commend you for advocating for yourself and advocating for others, because if we don't do that, then who will? So thank you so much. And last but certainly not least, I would love for Peter to share some thoughts on his personal experience with us today.
Thank you, Stephanie and NAA. Thank you, everyone. What an amazing panel. Wow. I've already got goosebumps several times. So for me, this started long ago. I grew up to an amazing woman, a single mom who left a horribly abusive situation to raise me in a single wide mobile home. And in her 40s, struggled to go back and complete her GED in finance, just to get a job and be diagnosed with multiple sclerosis and lose kind of some of the use of her hands as she was counting money and doing work. And to see the disadvantages that she was up against just really hit me. I also had an aunt in the 80s who came out of the closet, and to watch her lose her friends, much of her family, and to see her experience and how impactful it was just always became this, feeding of the advocacy DNA that's inside of me. And I wanted to leverage any privilege that I had to be able to help people. And so in high school, I was blessed to be able to attend 20 trips to inner cities and South and Central America to build schools and teach young kids. And it was through those experiences that I recognized that the ethos that I saw in the social groups that were doing this needed to be built and helped in corporate America. And I had an amazing opportunity to build a D&I program at Empower Retirement, a 120-year-old financial services company, and see amazing results when you went to people with authenticity and inspired them to do the right thing. So I'm super passionate, but really blessed to be able to be part of this group.
Thank you so much, Peter. Wow. We're getting some great comments in the chat box. People are just really, really moved by you all sharing your stories. And I think people are learning a lot about your history, your past, and of course, where your passion comes from, which is really engaging to all of us to see where you all have started and why this means so much to you. So let's start with our first panelist question. As a leader, how do people make you feel included? And I would love for Chikora to start off with this. So how do you make people feel included, and how do they make you feel included?
Well, I'm very intentional about making everyone in my organization feel included and valued. And that starts at the onset of the relationship. It starts all the way up front during the recruiting process. When we're recruiting and we're onboarding, we're making sure that everyone knows that they are valuable and they are being considered. And we ask that they are as transparent and vocal as possible. One thing that we do is we ask a question. It's one single question. It's more of a three-part question, but the question is this: where is Occupancy Heroes excelling? Where are we lacking? And what can we do to improve? And this question is asked during recruiting, it's asked during onboarding, at our weekly meetings, and if employment is to end, then it's asked then too. And that question allows everyone to feel included in all facets of the business. It allows them to feel valuable because they are valuable, because we value their input. Yeah.
That's a great answer. And you know, how you make people feel is so powerful in general. Mm-hmm. And so I love that you're asking those questions and you're constantly evaluating. Peter, what about you?
To me, it starts and ends with authenticity. You know, when I became a father, I learned really quickly that you can't fool people, in particular, even young children. I would try to portray something to them and they read through it every single time. So this has to be something that is meaningful to leaders. So it has to, you have to, and with a lot of people, you have to sell in the value to them that it's a good thing to do and the right thing to do, a beautiful combination. And then from there, the most important thing is listening. You have got to listen. At Cardinal, we took this approach. We said, we are going to listen before we do anything. And then we're going to learn before we lead. So we're going to do those things first. So listening is so critical. I love the quote from Andy Stanley when he said, leaders who don't listen will eventually be surrounded by people who have nothing to say. And companies that win have people who have something to say. So you have to listen. And the last and most important element to make people feel included is that you do something about what they said. If you don't, you will lose credibility. So to me, it starts with authenticity, it moves to listening, and then it ends with action.
That's great. Listening is important. And I think we all can take time to improve that skill just a little bit. But you're right. It is hard to fool people. They always say, ask a child if you want to know the truth about anything, because they are so authentic and they can see straight through us. So I think leading with that approach is really critical. So let's change gears a little bit. I want to know, and I think our attendees want to know as well, how do you become involved in the development of a D&I program in your organization? Keeping in mind that when we did a poll earlier at the start of our webinar, we found that, you know, just under 50% did have a program in place. But we had about 7% that were unsure if they even had a program at all. So thinking about that, how do our listeners, how do they become involved in the development of a program within their organization? And I would really love it if Marcus could kind of take over the reins on that question for me.
Sure. Thanks so much, Stephanie. I really love this question. I think I'm in a unique position because I have an opportunity to view the housing industry at the aggregate, right? So I know that there are many different people, many different companies that are in different places. One thing that I would recommend, in my view, D&I has many layers, and I think the easiest layer to understand is the people component, right? And one thing that I learned early on is that people themselves have a different interpretation of what diversity and inclusion is. They all, as you've seen it from the conversations on the panel so far, we tend to look at that through our own lenses, which I think is fabulous, particularly, especially when it comes from a place of compassion and, vulnerability and things of that nature. That said, from a corporate standpoint, I think it's important that not only we focus on people and give them something tangible, but there's also the data piece and not being afraid to actually be visible from where your company is. One thing I've been challenging the industry is don't be afraid to just start off by saying, we are not that diverse. We are not that inclusive, right? And here's what our numbers look like. And then the second piece is the value proposition. I think because all of us deal with we're in corporate America, we deal with bottom line. There's always been a need to illustrate the value of everything. And I think, there's been tons and tons of studies that indicate that the more diverse you are, particularly at the executive levels, particularly if you have more women, you're going to be more successful for your bottom line. There's a great story that I like to always tell when I'm engaging with my partners about the tech industry. I think all of us are familiar with Airbnb. And I don't know if anyone's aware, but Airbnb recently over the last 5 years came under a lot of scrutiny because of their algorithm. Their algorithm was deliberately excluding people of color, right? And the CEO was very adamant about saying, he took full responsibility. He said, this is a direct reflection of our hiring practices. We don't have people on our staff who understand what it's like to actually build code that is inclusive for everyone. So I think that that's a really, really important, right? I think from all of our perspectives, whether you're the CEO at the top or whether you're an associate or an entry-level employee, you have a responsibility to advocate for the things that you believe in. And obviously there's ways of employment resource groups. There's also ways that you can push for more data. And there's also ways that you can get speakers to come into your company just to talk about their experience. So those are the three things that I think are important and have certainly pushed for when I'm being able to communicate across the board.
I just want to emphasize one of the things you said that just resonated with me really well is you have a responsibility. And I think that is so important that people hear that and understand it doesn't matter what position you are. It doesn't matter where you fall on that leadership ladder, but that you have a responsibility. It's the old saying, see something, say something, and being able to become aware of what's going on and knowing that there needs to be change there. So thank you, Marcus. Peter, what could you share about that?
To me, it's really about the power of small. I love Mother Teresa was once interviewed with somebody and this person asked her, they said, does it bother you that what you do is a drop in the bucket? And she looked at that person and said, don't ever say that to me again. What I do is not a drop in the bucket. It's a drop in the ocean. And yet I still do it. And it's this idea that we don't have to do something huge to make an impact. Don't let perfect be the enemy of your done. Do something small, even if that, when I talked about listening, if that means just calling somebody who is a person that is of another race than you or sexual orientation and talk to them and listen, that's a start to D&I. The next thing I would say is education. Educate yourself. There are so many amazing resources. Podcasts like HBR's Women at Work, Jennifer Brown's The Will to Change, NPR's Code Switch. Read books like So You Want to Talk About Race, The Fire Next Time by James Baldwin, Sister Outsider. There's movies like The 13th Amendment, Selma, Milk. I mean, there are so many things that you can do. What I would challenge people is to say, what's one thing you would do to push D&I in your organization? And again, it can be as simple as calling somebody.
The smallest gestures make the grandest impacts here, and that's great. Even knowing if you are only going to affect one person or one small change, that kind of does the whole effect where it gets bigger and bigger, the snowball effect, and eventually will bring on the big change that you want. So thank you, Peter. I will mention to our attendees, so I am seeing you, you are being heard, you're in the chat box, and you're asking some questions. I'm actually making note of that. I was going to kind of merge away from our questions and go to that, but I really think it's important that we get through some of this. So if you're putting the chat, the questions in the chat or the Q&A, please know we are going to get to those momentarily. So thank you so much for doing that. What setbacks have you experienced while implementing D&I programs in your organization. Now, this is huge, right? Because some people say, well, it's failure. What do we do now? So Kristen, talk to me about that.
So I'm going to say there have probably been as many setbacks as there have been steps forward. And, you know, wherever you are in the journey, I think having setting expectations and managing expectations is really important. When I told my story in the beginning, I said, this is my truth, right? My truth is not everyone's truth. And so the journey is about finding the truth, and you may discover your truth along the way, but it's all about meeting people where they are. And so when I started the work, and really I learned this much sooner than before I started formally practicing, but I realized very quickly that not everybody was going to care. It wasn't going to change the world. And so several of the panelists have said, you know, take baby steps, one mind, one person at a time. Whether you're participating in a program, whether you're leading a program, you have to understand that every single person, even if they look alike, their perspective is going to be different. Their life experience is going to be different. The way they see the world is going to be different. The way they perceive race is going to be different. The way they perceive gender is going to be different. And so several people have talked about listening and the importance of listening. There's a lot of divisive conversation. The media has played a huge role in partisanship around the issues that are going on in the nation. And as individuals, we have to get centered, and we have to make sure that we are educating ourselves. So there's a lot of disruption. There's a lot of things that can derail the best intentions. But what's most important is listening intently versus reactive action, and really engaging people in the conversation. But don't expect to change the world. I made it a point to surround myself with other individuals from much larger organizations outside of the real estate industry to kind of calibrate some of what I was doing during my time at Bozzuto. And I always felt like, oh gosh, I'm not making any progress. All of these things, why can't people see what I see, right? Isn't this obvious? So I made it a point to expand my network, go to conferences, interact with people who were at much larger organizations outside of the industry, organizations that were seen as real leaders in this space. And they're having challenges too. So it's a journey, no matter how big you are. I was a party of one doing the work. There's some organizations that have entire departments that do this work, and they're still fighting the fight, and they're still on a journey, and they're still having challenges. So, you know, that's my insight on that.
Kristen, you're so right. We are all in this together. And you said something very powerful, that we all have to get centered. And I think that's really important, because there is so much disruption, like you said, going around all around us. And the media does not make that easy for us. And they are feeding us all types of things that fit their agenda. And so being able as individuals to get centered to make that difference is huge. So Marcus, talk to me. What are you thinking?
Sure. So again, love this question, and certainly, Kristen, appreciate your perspective as well. I think from my view, and specifically for my scope of work, because I engage across multiple companies and help them connect with diverse college students from all over the United States. And one thing that I see as a major setback is the fact that a lot of companies are not deliberate and explicit in their diverse actions, right? You can say you're about diversity recruiting. However, if you don't have deliberate and intentional actions associated with connecting with those students, that's a miss. For example, you know, I think in the industry, in the housing industry, particularly the multifamily industry, you know, I know this, what I'm going to say is provocative, but I think that you have a few ways to recruit. And I think, you know, through my time and in conversations with employers, A lot of people are most comfortable recruiting through referrals and recruiting through, the family chain. And, from the data that I have and from the speeches that I do, I can tell you with 100% confidence that the industry workforce is not diverse. And when most people are referring, they refer people who look and think like them. To that end, I call that country club recruiting. And if you're very intentional about changing the industry from a D&I standpoint, then that has to switch, right? You have to be deliberate in going to colleges and universities that have a higher diversity index. You have to be deliberate about bringing forth mentoring and sponsorship opportunities. Speaking from my background, I mentioned that I'm from inner city Buffalo, New York, and I really wasn't exposed to everyone in my town, blue collar. My father was an interstate truck driver who lived in Chicago. My mom worked her tail off to have jobs in healthcare and then lost those jobs. So I had no visibility into housing finance. And along my academic pursuits, I was told that I didn't have the qualifications to even do the work that I'm doing now. So when minorities are entering college, oftentimes they're not even exposed to our line of work, particularly at the corporate level and the finance level and things of that nature. So the setback is not being deliberate and intentional about your intent, not having a recruiting strategy that you can measure your from to. So I would encourage people, if you're very serious about this, to again, understand where you are now and understand the change you want to make. I dealt with an employer who was an employer partner in Future Housing Leaders, and they were saying, hey, we don't know where we are on our D&I journey. We're struggling to even start. And because we're struggling to start, we're fearful for bringing in minority students and women because we don't want them to have a bad experience. I give them 100% credit for being where they are. But have they taken action since that statement to make things better? More to come. So again, intentional, deliberate, measure. Those are the things that I would recommend.
That's great feedback. And I hear you and Chikora and our other panelists really talking a lot about being deliberate and intentional about what you're doing. It has to be so much more than lip service. And so I love that you're acknowledging where people are with this, but then they've got to do better. So you can't just stay there. You have to acknowledge where you're at, but then you've got to make strides for improvement. Great points there. So let's talk a little bit about how does your organization create equity? Chikora, I would love for you to talk a little bit about this.
Well, we create equity by being inclusive and by putting our money where our mouths are. I would say that our team is more excited about the money part. So one thing that we do is every single month, our team receives monthly performance bonuses based on the performance of the overall company. The thing that we do different is that every single person receives a bonus. That's all the way down to the receptionist. And that shows everyone that everyone is important, everyone is valued. And so we can't do this without you. So everyone feels that unity there. Now, we also make sure that everyone is included. So we have our weekly board meetings, and at the end of those meetings, then we bring in our team, and that's everyone on our internal staff. They come in and they sit and we talk about performance goals, what our target markets are, and so on. In that, there's so much to learn from that, because we have people of all ages, different backgrounds, and we learn a lot, and it lets them to know that they are important. They have the equity and stock in the company. So it helps us as a whole. And I got to tell you, just briefly, we have one of my secretaries is, she's a receptionist. She's young. We brought her on board when she was 18. And she's 21 now, but we were, hosting the job fairs, just simple things. And we said, how can we make this better? Well, she was one of those people that don't really say much. And she opened her mouth and it was just like, oh, because she said, well, we need to do this and we need to do that. We're targeting the youth and this is how we need to do it. It was just like everyone kind of looked at themselves, and it made such a difference. So that goes, with women, there's so much that you bring to the table. I think, like you said, I think, Marcus, you just spoke on this. With women, you have a higher success rate when you take on the information that women are saying, when you actually listen to it. Okay, it's just like, us wives at home talking to our husbands, listen, it makes a difference because we're right. But that's what we do. We make sure that everyone is included. And like I said, money speaks volumes.
I agree. You're motivating your people, but I love that you're being so inclusive to ensure that regardless of the position, everybody knows that their part is vital to your organization and the success of it. So not just saying that, but actually doing it and following up with those bonuses is huge. Thank you for sharing that, Chikora. Kristen, I would love for you to share on this as well.
Sure. So I'm in a unique position because I have the opportunity to work with multiple organizations being in the consulting space. And so my perspective and our model as it relates to equity is that equity is really a function of organizational design. So we've talked about a lot of things like recruiting and promoting and referrals, and all of those things are great. But you have to begin with the basic foundation in which you've structured your organization. And if we take a walk back through history and we look at American history and some of the fundamentals in which this country was developed, the intentions were that all people were created equal and there would be equity and for all. But then over time, whether it be formally or informally, groups were written out of that plan. And so that's why we see a lot of the issues that we see today in housing, in what's going on with COVID and the disparity that that's caused. And so the way that this country was built was really to cater to the majority. And so you wouldn't be surprised to find out that most companies are also structured in a similar way, whether it be intentionally or not. So when it comes to equity, you have to look at all different aspects of your organization. And what I would say is, instead of showing up to a meeting to solve for business challenges and looking around the room and saying who's here, I would say look around the room and say who's missing. Okay, look around the room and say who's missing. Start doing some scenario planning. It's something that we do a lot. What if we did it a different way? And that's an opportunity to solicit the perspectives of people that you might not normally have in that conversation. So inequity can show up in all different parts of your organization. It can show up in your recruiting process. It can also show up in your benefits plan. So what are you doing from a health and wellness standpoint to make sure that your benefits speak to multiple generations, multiple races and genders? When's the last time you looked at your employee handbook and looked at the pronouns that you're using in your employee handbook? So there's just so many places where inequity can show up, and you've got to ask what's missing, who's missing, what if.
That's great feedback. And, you talk about the pronouns and including them. That's something that seems very small and insignificant to some, but makes such a huge difference to others. And so I love that, making sure that you're going back and reviewing things and updating as necessary.
Mm-hmm.
All right. So I think most of our attendees would agree here. This is the loaded question. They want to know, okay, where do we start? What are simple initiatives that anybody can begin to implement, regardless of who they are? So I think, Peter, let's go ahead and have you kick that off.
Yeah, and I'll keep it really short. To me, I think I had mentioned listening. I think you really have to listen. So leveraging a survey tool is great. But there's two components that to me are the foundation. Number one is a council to help guide the organization and hold the organization accountable. And I answered in one of the Q&As how we did it. We leveraged two things. I think that's so important. We have to have voices heard at the table, and the council is a great way to do that. Number two is a foundation of knowledge. We have to challenge people to think different. A great launch of implicit or unconscious bias to get people to change. And the story I will share is I delivered this to an organization, to a president who had been at this company for 45 years in financial services for a long time. And I don't know that he was committed, but he went through this unconscious bias training and he transformed. And literally within 6 months, we hired what became one of the first transgender executives in financial services ever. And this person made the hiring decision. And to me, it's because we opened their eyes to this idea of unconscious bias that we all have. So I would start with those two things. Start to build, first listen, but then start to build a council and then start to educate the organization.
Great feedback. And we do all have unconscious bias. So I love that you've pointed that out. Chikora, what do you think?
Well, I'd say start with honesty. Take a look around your organization and be honest with yourself. Where do you see weaknesses? What's the historic trend of your organization that needs to be repaired? I'd also say reintroduce yourself to your staff and listen to what they have to say. And when you do this, be open to criticism, because we're not all perfect. We are not the best knowers. And in saying that, we may need to also bring on a professional, because we don't always know. And it's best that we strive to get it right the first time versus having to go back and do it. We're in a world, everything is changing, and it's changing rapidly. And we all know that nothing in life stays the same. And basically, we just need to know, if you don't evolve, then eventually you're going to become extinct. And that's something that we do not want. So, with that being said, I'd say lastly, do it in good spirit. Don't do it because this is something that you have to do, that you're forced to do. Do it because it's something that needs to be done and it's something that you want to do.
Great
because
point.
what you know is your responsibility to change.
That's great. And that goes back to the authenticity that Peter spoke about earlier. If you're doing it because you feel forced and you have to, your employees are going to see through it. People are going to see through it. You have to do it with those good intentions. So excellent point, Chikora. So Marcus, talk to me a little bit about what did you expect when you started developing your D&I program, and tell us if you learned anything from that process.
Yeah, so the first thing was that this is really, really hard, like tremendously difficult, right? And I think, the first conversation I had when Future Housing Leaders was launched was one, what are we hoping to achieve, right? I know we're saying this, but and you guys hear me talking about measuring all the time, but this is really, really hard. And then two, I think everyone has to be on the same page about what diversity is. And I think the panelists have done an amazing job today to not only talk about race, ethnicity, gender, sexual orientation, and disability. We also include that diversity of thought from a Fannie Mae perspective in Future Housing Leaders to really help us push to move the needle. I think the biggest learning, of course, is that everyone, because I deal with so many different employer partners across the board, everyone's in different places. And this is a journey, not a sprint. And I think, again, the biggest challenge that I've had is people making false commitments and not being authentic about really following through. So I think, and this probably isn't the theme that I've said, throughout the panel, but if this is something that you're going to do, be authentic. Peter mentioned about children seeing through. Your employees can see through as if this is a check the box exercise. So be authentic and don't be afraid, again, just to echo some thoughts to figure out kind of where you are and then measure where you want to go.
Great feedback. And measuring, I love that you've mentioned that several times. That's been a constant theme when you've spoken today, because it's not enough to just do it, but you have to be able to measure where you started, how far you've come, and how far you're going to go. So that's really great. Kristen, I would love for you to share on your experience here.
Sure. Well, I agree with everything that Marcus and the other panelists have said. It's such great insight. You know, when I started, I expected that, like I had said earlier, everybody would see what I was seeing, and I had spent quite a bit of time looking at some data, talking to employees, doing focus groups, but you know, not everybody was ready to make a move on the things that I thought were really important for us to be thinking about. So, you know, I think you have to take baby steps. There's a great story from an African storyteller, and it's about a hummingbird. I'll tell it really quickly right now. But the jungle is on fire, and this little hummingbird goes and starts flying back and forth to get a drop of water and put it on the fire. And meanwhile, all of the other animals run out of the jungle, and they're watching the jungle burn down. And one of the animals says to the hummingbird, you know, you're just a little hummingbird. You're just a tiny little bird. What can you do with one drop of water at a time going back and forth into the burning jungle? And the hummingbird says, I'm doing what I can. I'm doing what I can. I'm not going to stand by and watch the forest burn down. So I'll do what I can. And it's that story just sticks with me because standing on the sidelines and watching everything go to whatever, I won't swear on the webinar today, but you know, we all have to do what we can, and even if it seems small, it might make a huge difference. And there's no instant gratification. My Lord, I've shared so many tears of joy and sadness in doing this work. I call it my heart work, right? It's hard work, but it's my heart work. And you know, expect the highs to be high and the lows to be low.
That's great. I love how you say it's hard work, right? Because we talked about earlier, really doing it with a purpose and having meaning behind it. So that's fantastic. I wanted to bring up a point in the chat box that Jason mentioned, and a couple of other attendees have really brought it up as well, is it's really not enough just to have the fair housing training every single year and expect that that's enough to cover diversity, discrimination, racism, inclusion, all of these things. And so I think it's great that we're acknowledging that and starting to look towards solutions, because education is really important here for everyone. So I'm going to put the panelists on the spot for a minute. I've got 1 minute to 12. Can we try to get through a couple of these questions? And I know I'm asking you all to spend a few more minutes with us, and I know our attendees have busy lives as well, but I think it would be really great if we could tackle just a few of those. I got thumbs up? Score good? Okay. All right. Let's do just a couple of these, shall we? All right. Peter, you kind of talked a little bit about this earlier, but Stacy had asked, how do you tackle the process of listening? And who did you listen to?
I looked across the organization at people who had different experiences than me, and I reached out to them. And one thing we actually did too is we created a block of time for 4 hours one Friday, where we said, we're going to focus on listening as an organization. And we encouraged teams to get together to talk. And during that time, I reached out to about 6 people, asked them questions, and just listened to their story. That's a great personal way to do it. I think at a broader level, you can use some really great survey tools. I'm a huge fan of Qualtrics. Obviously, Pop Survey is really good. Google has tools, SurveyMonkey. There's lots of tools so that people can give authentic feedback in a way that they feel safe, even if the organization isn't set up in a way where they might feel safe yet. So those are the 2 ways I think are the most impactful: personal outreach and challenging other team members to do that, and then some survey function to get that info.
For survey functions, and I can open this up to all the panelists, are you noticing that others are responsive to surveys? And I'm assuming you probably make it anonymous, but you always have that constant challenge that people say, is it really anonymous? Can I be truthful in the survey? I mean, are you finding that the surveys are giving good feedback?
I can take that one. Thanks, Kristen. I think, yes. So I can use Fannie Mae as an example. I mean, we have 7,000 full-time employees, and we do we do quarterly surveys and an annual survey. And most people we find are really truthful about what they want to see. And then we're also able to cut the data from those who self-identify as, a minority or, someone who is LGBTQ or female. So we're able to look across the board and make decisions. But, surveys are a valuable tool for us. And we certainly use that to not only make decisions, but also inform, our board and FHFA, about the things that are working well and certainly opportunities for improvement.
Yeah, I was going to say that there are some tools that that you can also use to crowdsource feedback, and so it's a little bit different than a survey. But crowdsourcing feedback is another great way to anonymously pose a very pointed question and ask them demographic questions to understand who's responding. The other thing I want to say about surveys is that doing surveys with residents is something most companies do. And, we are an experiential business. I don't think it matters whether you're in affordable and student housing and military. This is an experiential business. It's more than just walls in a building. And so if you expect your employees to provide an exceptional experience to a very diverse demographic of customer, then they have to have an experience inside of your organization that is reflective of the experience you want your customers to have. And the only way you're going to understand whether you're doing that internally is through some sort of survey mechanism, some sort of focus group effort, or some sort of facilitated dialogue.
I would say that it is very important to have surveys. We have a very open, everyone feels free to discuss amongst the group within my organization. So I was really surprised when I found out that they were looking forward to the surveys. We're working with a company they helped us put together our D&I program. And when they came into play, everybody was looking forward to those surveys. And we do surveys every month. So I think it allows people to, those people who don't really kind of want to rock the boat in open forums, to be able to be honest on those surveys. Also, it helps if you are able to bring those people in and speak with them. If you're able to speak with individuals, that helps too. So in addition to the surveys.
Well, I'm getting a little bit of feedback here in our chat, and I appreciate it because our chat has just been filled with so much great conversation and engagement. But I think what we're getting the most right now is that we've got a request for part 2. And I know I speak for myself and probably most of our attendees here today when I say that we could listen to the 4 of you speak all day. You've got great stories, you have great insight, you have great actionable items to share. And so in the event of everyone's time, I would love to go all day, I'm going to be honest, because this has been fantastic. But I think that we should maybe hold some of these questions. We have about 6 more out there, and I think we should probably consider doing a part 2. And am I getting shakes heads? Yeah. I mean, the people have spoken on this webinar, and they're loving every bit of it. Well, I just want to take a quick moment to thank our panelists, Kristen, Marcus, Peter, Chikora. It has been an absolute pleasure today. We greatly appreciate your expertise and your time to be here with us today. I personally want to thank everyone for joining us. And I do want to quickly turn it back over in just a moment to Greg, who's going to make one last introduction and wrap it up for us. But for those of you who are interested in additional resources that NAA has to offer, we do have our next webinar coming up. It is free. It's Women, Diversity, Growth, and Leadership in the Rental Housing Industry. It's going to be September 9th, same time as today, 11 a.m., noon Eastern Standard Time. So I do invite you to do that. In addition, we do have some other resources. If Amy, you want to go to the next slide for me, please. There we go. Diversity and Inclusion Opportunity, the IDI grant deadline is fastly approaching. I know September 30th seems a ways away, but we are almost through August. And so keep that in mind. This is a fantastic opportunity. You can go over to naahq.org/diversity and inclusion portion of our website, and that will give you more information on how to participate in that. And then finally, we do want to remind you about the best practices we have for diversity inclusion, which some of our members of our panel today did contribute to that. And then in addition, we do have the online course on Visto for unconscious bias, understanding bias to unleash potential. So these are additional resources that NAA is providing to their membership. And so with that, thank you again for joining us. And Greg, I'd like to turn it over to you.
Sure. Thanks very much. I agree. Great panel. And I want to say one thing about the IDI grant from a few slides ago. Opportunity for you to access up to $25,000 in monies that have been put aside for any individual or group or an association. If you have an idea that you'd like to help move forward diversity inclusion efforts within your either your local community, your association, or your company, put together an application and put it in and see what happens. So good luck. Now, some of you may have wondered who this person is, like down to my bottom left over here. Rita. Rita's been on camera here, and she hasn't gotten anybody to acknowledge who she is, and I'm going to do that right now. So regional director. Rita is a regional director for PRG Real Estate, where she's been involved for over 12 years. She's a proud North Carolinian, having earned both her undergraduate degree at UNC Chapel Hill and her MBA in finance from UNC Pembroke. And as you can tell, she believes that education is essential for personal growth and development. In fact, she pursued a number of advanced certifications when she got into her career to help her advance. She's an alphabet soup of certifications, earning both her CPM and her ARM from IRM, and both the CAM and CAPS certifications from NAAEI. Yes, that is a shameless plug for certifications coming from the incoming president of NAAEI. She's also a major volunteer for our good friends over at the Triangle Apartment Association. And I first met Rita after she was appointed to NAA's inaugural Diversity and Inclusion Committee. And while she was initially quiet and unassuming, it didn't take long for us to see the depth of her conviction and the power of her experience. She currently serves as the chair for the D&I Education Subcommittee and is responsible for putting together this webinar series you are enjoying today. And Rita will be doing our wrap up for this excellent panel. I introduce you to my friend, Rita Zepeda.
Hi, Greg. Thank you so much for the kind introduction. I'm really thankful for all the panelists for contributing their time to advocate for diversity, inclusivity, and equity. They all responded to the call when we reached out to them. So thank you so much for your willingness to share your experiences. They're incredible, valuable. And as Greg mentioned, I am an immigrant and woman of color, and I love being part of this country. And as the Hummingbird, I will do my part to improve diversity in the workplace and to provide equity and inclusivity to those that are disadvantaged. So I really encourage you to speak your truth and to thank you for taking the time to learn about such important issues, and hopefully you can join us in the future webinars.